The rain poured down heavily that evening, drumming against the rooftops and turning the streets into long streams of water. People hurried along the sidewalks, clutching umbrellas that bent in the strong wind. Cars rushed past, spraying puddles onto those unlucky enough to be too close to the road. It was the kind of storm that made everyone want to stay indoors, but Marcus had no choice. He had just finished another long day of searching for work and was on his way back to his small apartment on the other side of town. His shoes were soaked, his jacket was damp, and the weight of his worries pressed on him more than the rain ever could. As he walked through a quiet street, Marcus noticed someone struggling up ahead. An elderly woman was standing at the corner, trying desperately to control an umbrella that had flipped inside out. The wind tugged at her thin coat, and her grocery bag slipped dangerously from her hands. She looked fragile, her gray hair plastered to her forehead, her body trembling under the cold. Marcus paused for a moment. He could have kept walking after all, he was cold, tired, and worried about his own problems, but something in him wouldn't allow it. He hurried forward, splashing through puddles, and called out to her. "Ma'am, let me help you." The woman looked up, startled, but relief spread across her face when Marcus reached her side. Without hesitation, he took the grocery bags from her arms, steadying her with his other hand. He pulled off his own jacket, holding it above her head like a shield against the rain. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. She looked at him with gratitude shining in her eyes. "Oh, thank you, young man," she said, her voice weak but full of sincerity. "This storm came out of nowhere. I didn't think I'd make it to the bus stop." Marcus smiled gently. "Don't worry. It's just around the corner. I'll walk you there." Together they moved slowly down the sidewalk, Marcus holding her groceries carefully and making sure she didn't slip on the wet pavement. The cars continued to speed by, splashing water, but Marcus kept the woman steady. For those few minutes, the worries he carried about his own life seemed to fade into the background. It felt good, right, to help someone who needed it. When they finally reached the bus stop, Marcus placed her groceries on the bench, checking to make sure everything was intact. The elderly woman lowered herself onto the seat, still shivering but safe now under the small shelter. She looked at him again, studying his face as though she wanted to remember it. "You're very kind," she said softly. "Not many people stop to help anymore. Everyone just rushes by, thinking only of themselves. But you took the time." Marcus shrugged modestly. "It's nothing. You just looked like you needed a hand. Anyone would have done the same." But deep inside, he knew that wasn't true. Too many times had he seen people walk past someone in need, pretending not to notice. He didn't want to be one of those people. The bus rumbled in the distance, headlights cutting through the rain. The woman smiled warmly at him, her eyes full of gratitude. "I don't know your name, but I'll remember this." "Thank you." Marcus gave a small nod and stepped back as the bus approached. "Take care of yourself, ma'am." He watched as she boarded, the driver helping her with her bags. For a moment, she turned back and gave him one last look, a gentle smile on her face, before disappearing inside the bus. Then the doors closed, and the vehicle pulled away into the stormy night. Marcus stood there for a few seconds, rain running down his face, before finally pulling his damp jacket back on. He was soaked, but he didn't care. As he walked the rest of the way home, he felt a quiet sense of peace. He hadn't solved any of his own problems, he still didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he had done something good, something that mattered. When he reached his apartment, the room was as small and plain as it had always been. The paint on the walls was chipped, the furniture was second-hand, and the heating barely worked. Marcus set down his wet shoes and sat heavily on the couch. For a long while, he listened to the rain hammering against the window. His thoughts drifted to the woman he had helped. He wondered if she got home safely, if anyone was waiting for her, or if she lived alone. Life could be so hard for the elderly, especially when they had no one to lean on. He leaned back, sighing. Tomorrow was his big interview, and the pressure weighed on him like a stone. He had been out of work for months, applying everywhere, only to face rejection after rejection. His savings were nearly gone, and he was behind on rent. The interview tomorrow felt like his last chance. Still, even as fear crept in, he thought back to the woman's smile. For that one moment at the bus stop, it felt like the storm outside and the storm inside his life didn't matter. Helping her had reminded him that even when things seemed hopeless, he could still choose to be the kind of man he wanted to be. That night, Marcus carefully laid out the one good shirt he owned, pressing it as best he could. He polished his worn shoes until they looked decent and practiced answering questions in front of the mirror. His reflection showed tired eyes, but also determination. He whispered to himself that tomorrow could be different, that maybe, just maybe, his luck was about to change. As he finally lay down in bed, the sound of the rain softened. Marcus closed his eyes with a small, hopeful smile. He didn't know it, but the simple act of kindness he had shown that night was about to change his life in a way he never expected. The storm had passed by morning, leaving behind streets washed clean and skies painted in a dull shade of gray. Marcus woke up earlier than usual, his heart pounding with nerves. Today was the day that could change everything for him. He sat up on his worn-out mattress, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, and looked around his small apartment. The walls looked even more faded in the morning light, and the hum of the old refrigerator was the only sound filling the silence. He got up, walked to the tiny kitchen, and poured himself a glass of water. There was no breakfast waiting for him. He had skipped buying groceries to save what little money he had left. His stomach rumbled, but he pushed the hunger aside. He knew he needed to focus on the interview. It wasn't just about finding a job. It was about survival, about proving to himself that he still had a future worth fighting for. Marcus carefully laid his shirt on the table, the same shirt he had pressed the night before. It was plain white, with slight wear at the collar, but it was all he had that looked professional. He slipped it on, buttoning it slowly as if each button carried the weight of his hopes. Then he polished his shoes again, even though he had already done it last night. He wanted to make sure there was nothing, absolutely nothing, that could make him look unprepared. As he dressed, his thoughts kept circling back to the elderly woman he had helped in the rain. Her fragile smile, her words of gratitude, they had stuck in his mind like a soft light in the middle of darkness. He hadn't thought much of it last night, but now, in the calm of the morning, he realized how rare such moments were. A small act of kindness had given him a strange kind of strength. Maybe it was silly, but he felt as though helping her was a good sign, like the universe was reminding him that goodness still mattered. He looked at himself in the cracked mirror hanging on the wall. His tie was old, a bit faded, but he knotted it carefully. His hands trembled slightly, not just from nerves but from the heavy burden of uncertainty. He whispered quietly to himself, as if speaking the words aloud would make them real. "You can do this. Today will be different." He grabbed his folder with his resume, worn from being carried to too many interviews before, and stepped outside. The air was cool, the streets damp with the memory of last night's storm. He walked to the bus stop, trying to calm his racing thoughts. Around him, the city was slowly waking up. People hurried to work, children in uniforms walked to school, and vendors opened their shops. Everyone seemed to have a place to be, a role to play. Marcus felt like an outsider, still searching for where he belonged. On the bus, he sat by the window, staring out as buildings and streets blurred past. He practiced answers in his head. What are your strengths, your weaknesses, why do you want to work here? He had rehearsed them countless times, yet somehow they always slipped away under pressure. He clenched his fists and tried to imagine himself sitting confidently in front of the interviewers, but doubt crept in like a shadow. What if they didn't see his worth? What if this was just another rejection? When the bus finally stopped near the tall glass building, Marcus stepped off, his breath catching in his throat. The office tower rose high above him, sleek and polished, a symbol of success that felt almost unreachable. He stood still for a moment, staring at it, before forcing his legs to move forward. Each step felt heavier than the last. He entered the lobby, where the air smelled faintly of fresh flowers and expensive cleaning polish. The floors were shiny, the furniture modern, and people in crisp suits walked quickly, their footsteps echoing against the marble. Marcus felt out of place in his old shoes and second-hand tie, but he straightened his back, determined not to let it show. At the reception desk, he gave his name nervously. The receptionist smiled politely and told him to wait. He sat down on one of the sleek chairs, clutching his folder like it was a lifeline. Time moved slowly, every second dragging on. His heart beat louder with each tick of the clock. As he waited, his mind wandered again to last night. He remembered the way the elderly woman had looked at him, as though his simple kindness had meant the world to her. For some reason, the memory steadied him. He whispered to himself again, "Just be yourself. That's enough." Finally, a man in a suit approached him and asked him to follow. Marcus stood, wiped his damp palms on his pants, and walked through the wide hallway. His shoes clicked softly against the floor as he was led to a set of heavy wooden doors. The man opened them, gesturing for Marcus to step inside. The interview room was large, with tall windows letting in the gray light of the morning. A long table stretched across the room, and several people sat behind it, their expressions serious but curious. Marcus's eyes swept across the faces nervously, and then his heart nearly stopped. At the center of the table, sitting with quiet authority, was the elderly woman he had helped the night before. She looked completely different. Her hair was neatly styled, her coat replaced by a formal suit, and her presence carried a strength that filled the room. For a brief second, Marcus thought he might be imagining things, but then she gave the slightest smile, her eyes recognizing him. Marcus felt his breath catch. He had no idea who she really was last night, no clue that the stranger he had helped in the rain would be here today, sitting across from him in a position of power. He quickly looked away, trying to control the shock written across his face. The panel introduced themselves one by one, each asking him to sit. Marcus lowered himself into the chair, his mind spinning. He couldn't stop thinking about her. Did she remember him clearly? Did it matter here? Should he mention it or stay silent? He struggled to focus as the first question was asked. Taking a deep breath, Marcus began to answer, his voice unsteady at first but slowly gaining strength. He spoke about his experience, his determination, his willingness to work hard despite setbacks. As he talked, he couldn't help glancing at the elderly woman from time to time. She sat quietly, listening with an expression he couldn't quite read. Her presence was both comforting and intimidating, like a secret that only the two of them shared. Inside, Marcus's thoughts were a storm of hope and fear. He didn't know what the outcome would be, but something told him that this interview was unlike any other he had ever faced. He had walked in expecting only a chance at a job, but now it felt like something far greater was at stake, something that connected the kindness of last night with the possibility of tomorrow. The air inside the interview room felt heavy, as though every word Marcus spoke was being weighed carefully on invisible scales. His hands rested tightly on his folder, his knuckles white with tension. He tried his best to answer each question clearly, focusing on his skills, his past experiences, and his determination to grow. The panel members nodded occasionally, some taking notes, others glancing at him with thoughtful eyes. Yet Marcus's mind kept drifting back to the woman at the center of the table, the very same woman he had helped in the storm just hours earlier. Her presence both unsettled and comforted him. She hadn't spoken much, only listening while the others asked him questions. But her eyes stayed on him, steady and sharp, as though she was studying not just his words but the man behind them. Each time Marcus caught her gaze, he felt both nervous and strangely encouraged, as though her quiet smile from last night was still echoing between them. The panel asked him about his problem-solving skills, about times when he had faced difficulties at work. Marcus hesitated before answering, his mind racing back to the many struggles he had endured. He spoke honestly, not dressing up his experiences, but sharing how he had dealt with tough times when his previous company closed down. He told them about how he had taken temporary jobs, anything he could find, to keep himself afloat, and how he had continued searching for opportunities even when rejection after rejection came his way. At one point, one of the interviewers leaned forward and asked him what motivated him to keep trying when things looked so hopeless. Marcus took a deep breath, his voice softer now, almost reflective. "What keeps me going," he said slowly, "is knowing that every day is another chance to do better than yesterday. I believe that no matter how small an action may be, if it's done with honesty and care, it has value. That's what I hold on to." As he spoke, his eyes shifted slightly toward the elderly woman, though he quickly looked back at the panel. He didn't mention last night, didn't reveal what had happened in the rain, but in his heart, he knew his words were connected to that moment. The room was quiet for a few seconds after he finished, and then the questions continued. They asked about teamwork, leadership, and how he handled stress. Marcus gave the best answers he could, but inside, doubt gnawed at him. Were his words enough? Was he enough? The panelists' faces gave little away. After what felt like an eternity, the interview ended. Marcus stood, thanking them politely. His legs felt unsteady as he walked toward the door. Just before leaving, his eyes met the woman's once more. This time, she gave the faintest nod, almost as if to reassure him. He stepped out, the door closing softly behind him, and released a shaky breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Outside in the lobby, Marcus sat on one of the sleek chairs, trying to calm his racing heart. He replayed the interview over and over in his mind, second-guessing every answer. He worried that he had stumbled, that his nervousness had shown too clearly. He thought about the other candidates who might be more polished, more confident, more impressive. The weight of uncertainty pressed on him heavily, and yet, in the midst of his doubt, the memory of the woman's nod lingered. It was such a small gesture, but it gave him a thread of hope to hold onto. As he left the building, the cool air outside brushed against his face. He walked slowly, his mind spinning with questions. What would they decide? Did his honesty matter to them? Or were they looking only at his resume, at the gaps and the struggles that told a story of instability? He didn't know. All he could do was wait. That night, back in his apartment, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sounds of the city outside. His thoughts refused to rest. Every rejection he had faced before replayed in his head, like ghosts of the past haunting him. He feared that tomorrow would bring yet another disappointment, another reminder that life wasn't willing to give him a break. But then, as he turned restlessly on his thin mattress, the image of the woman returned to him. He remembered how she had looked sitting on that bus stop bench, cold and vulnerable in the storm. He remembered the gratitude in her eyes when he had offered his jacket. And now, remembering her sitting in that powerful chair in the interview room, he felt a strange connection between the two moments. Life was unpredictable in ways he could never imagine. Days passed slowly. Marcus checked his phone constantly, jumping at every call, but none were from the company. He tried to distract himself by running small errands, applying for other jobs online, but the waiting gnawed at him. He thought about giving up, about preparing himself for the disappointment, yet some part of him refused to let go of hope. Finally, one afternoon, his phone buzzed. His heart leapt as he saw the company's name on the screen. His hand trembled as he answered. The voice on the other end was calm and professional, asking him to hold for a moment. Marcus's chest tightened, every second stretching unbearably. Then the voice returned, delivering the words that made his knees nearly give out, "We're pleased to inform you that you've been selected for the position." Marcus froze, unable to speak at first. Relief, joy, and disbelief flooded through him all at once. He managed to thank them, his voice breaking slightly, before hanging up. He sat in silence for a long time, staring at the wall, tears stinging his eyes. After so many months of rejection, of struggle, of doubt, here was finally a chance. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that his future had been decided not only by his words in the interview but by his actions in the rain. Inside the boardroom, after he left, the elderly woman had spoken. She had told the panel what he had done the night before, how he had stopped to help her when no one else had. She described the kindness in his actions, the humility in his words, and she insisted that such character was worth more than a perfectly polished resume. Her influence carried weight, and her belief in him tipped the scales in his favor. As Marcus sat in his small apartment, overwhelmed with gratitude, he couldn't have imagined the role that simple moment in the rain had played. To him, it had just been an act of kindness, something anyone should do. But to her, it was a reflection of the kind of man he truly was. And in that truth, his life was about to change forever. After Marcus received the call that he had been selected for the job, his world felt different. For the first time in months, he had something solid to hold onto, something that gave him hope again. But what he didn't know was that the final decision had been more complicated than he could ever imagine. When he had left the interview room, the atmosphere inside shifted. The other panel members leaned back in their chairs, exchanging looks. Some were impressed with Marcus's sincerity, but others weren't convinced. One of them, a sharp-looking man with glasses, tapped his pen against the table and frowned. "His resume is weak," the man said firmly. "There are gaps in his employment history. He has experience, yes, but not enough for a position at this level. We need someone with a stronger record." Another panelist, a woman in her 30s, nodded in agreement. "He seemed nervous. I don't know if he can handle the pressure. This company is fast-paced. We can't afford to take chances." But then the elderly woman cleared her throat. The room grew quieter as she sat forward, her eyes steady and commanding. Her voice was calm, yet it carried a weight that silenced the room. "I disagree," she said. "What I saw in him today wasn't just nervousness. I saw honesty, humility, and determination. Those are qualities that cannot be written on paper. They reveal themselves in the way a person carries themselves. And in my opinion, that's far more important than a flawless resume." The man with glasses raised an eyebrow. "With respect, character is important, yes. But we're not a charity. This is a business. We need results." The elderly woman leaned back slightly, her expression softening but her words firm. "Results come from people who care about what they do. If someone only works for a paycheck, they'll give the bare minimum. But someone with integrity and resilience will give their heart. That's what I see in Marcus. He may not look perfect on paper, but I believe he has more to offer than any resume can show." The others shifted uncomfortably, glancing at one another. Some looked unconvinced, but others seemed to consider her words. Then she paused, her eyes distant for a moment, before she spoke again. "Last night, I saw Marcus outside of this office," she continued. "It was raining heavily. The storm was cruel, and I was struggling to make it to the bus stop. My umbrella broke, my groceries slipped, and I thought I would fall right there on the street. People walked past me, cars splashed water at my feet, and no one stopped. No one, except him." The panelists straightened, their faces shifting in surprise. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "Marcus is the man who stopped for me. He gave me his jacket, carried my bags, and made sure I was safe. He didn't know who I was. He didn't ask for anything in return. He simply did it because it was the right thing to do. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the kind of person I want in this company." The room fell into silence. The man with glasses lowered his pen, his expression uncertain now. The younger woman looked down at her notes, thoughtful. Slowly, the tension in the room softened as the weight of her words sank in. "You see," the elderly woman added gently, "skills can be taught. Knowledge can be learned. But compassion, integrity, and selflessness, those cannot be trained into someone. They come from within. Marcus has them. And I believe he will carry them into every task, every challenge, every opportunity he's given here." The panel members glanced at one another again, but this time there was less resistance. Some nodded, others sighed, but one by one they began to agree. The woman's conviction had swayed them. When the final vote was taken, Marcus's name was approved. It wasn't unanimous at first, but the majority sided with her. She had the most senior authority in the room, and her belief in Marcus tipped the scales. That night, as Marcus paced nervously in his apartment, not knowing the outcome yet, the elderly woman sat in her quiet home with a satisfied smile. She thought back to the rain, to the moment when Marcus had stood beside her, shielding her from the storm. She believed it was fate that had brought him to her, that perhaps life had put him in her path for a reason. The next morning, Marcus received the call confirming he had been chosen. He couldn't know that his simple act of kindness had spoken louder than any answer in the interview. He couldn't know that while others had doubted him, one person had seen his true worth. As the days moved forward, Marcus prepared for his first day at the company. He bought a second-hand suit with the little money he had left, polished his shoes again, and made sure he was ready. He didn't want to waste the chance he had been given. Meanwhile, inside the company, the elderly woman thought about how best to guide him. She knew the road ahead would not be easy for him. Some employees might question why he had been hired, and he would have to prove himself in ways that others did not. But she also knew that life's storms shape the strongest people, and Marcus had already shown he could stand tall in them. On the morning of his first day, Marcus stood at the foot of the towering building once more. But this time, he walked inside with a different feeling. There was still nervousness, but it was mixed with pride and determination. He was no longer just another man searching for work. He was an employee now, someone with a chance to build a future. He didn't know yet that the woman he had helped was not only a member of the board but also the founder of the company. He didn't know that she had personally fought for him in that room. All he knew was that he had been given a rare opportunity, and he was determined not to waste it. And somewhere high above in the same building, the elderly woman watched him from her office window as he entered the lobby. She smiled quietly to herself, feeling certain she had made the right choice. In her heart, she believed that sometimes the smallest gestures reveal the greatest truths. And in Marcus, she saw a man whose future was worth believing in. The first week at the new job felt like stepping into another world for Marcus. The office was full of people who spoke quickly, carried themselves with confidence, and seemed to know exactly what they were doing. Marcus, on the other hand, felt like a newcomer who had been dropped into a race already in progress. Still, he arrived early each day, stayed late when needed, and worked hard to learn everything he could. His first tasks weren't glamorous. He organized files, updated spreadsheets, and shadowed other employees to understand the flow of work. Some of his colleagues looked at him with curiosity, wondering quietly how he had landed the position. A few whispered that he seemed inexperienced, that maybe he wouldn't last long. Marcus heard the whispers sometimes, but he didn't let them shake him. He reminded himself that this was his chance, one he couldn't afford to waste. Every evening, when he returned home to his small apartment, Marcus felt exhausted but proud. For the first time in months, he no longer carried the weight of unemployment. He had structure, purpose, and most of all, hope. Each night, he thought back to the stormy evening when he had helped the elderly woman. He still didn't know who she really was within the company, but the memory encouraged him to keep pushing forward. It wasn't long before Marcus was called into a meeting with the very woman he had helped. The moment he entered her office, he froze. She sat behind a large wooden desk, the city skyline stretching out behind her through tall windows. Unlike the day of the interview, when she had simply been part of the panel, here she was clearly the one in command. Her presence filled the room with quiet authority. "Please, sit down, Marcus," she said kindly, gesturing to the chair across from her. Marcus sat, his palms sweating slightly. He didn't know why she had called him in, but he braced himself. She studied him for a moment, her eyes kind but sharp. Then she smiled. "I don't think we've been properly introduced. My name is Eleanor Grant. I founded this company over 30 years ago." Marcus blinked, stunned. The founder? He hadn't expected that. His voice came out in a whisper. I had no idea." "I know you didn't," she said with a gentle laugh. "But that's what made your kindness so genuine. You helped me when you didn't know who I was, when you thought you'd never see me again. That told me everything I needed to know about your character." Marcus felt his chest tighten with emotion. "I was just doing what anyone should do," he said quietly. Eleanor shook her head. "No, Marcus. Many people walked past me that night. They saw me struggling and kept going. But you stopped. You gave me your time, your strength, and your compassion. That is not something everyone does. And that is why I fought for you during the interview. Some weren't sure about hiring you, but I knew you were the right choice." Marcus's eyes widened in surprise. He had suspected she might have remembered him, but hearing that she had defended him, that she had been the one to decide his future, overwhelmed him. His throat tightened as he struggled to find the right words. "Thank you," he finally said, his voice trembling slightly. "Thank you for believing in me." Eleanor leaned forward, her expression warm. "Don't thank me. Prove me right. Work hard, stay true to who you are, and let your kindness guide you. This company needs people like you, people who remind us that success isn't just about profit, but about the values we hold." From that day on, Marcus worked with renewed determination. He didn't just want to succeed for himself, he wanted to live up to the faith Eleanor had placed in him. Slowly, he began to earn the respect of his colleagues. They noticed how he treated everyone with fairness, how he stayed late to help others, and how he never complained even when the work was tough. His sincerity began to shine through, and soon, the whispers that had once doubted him turned into words of admiration. Months passed, and Marcus grew into his role. He learned quickly, took on new responsibilities, and even led small projects. Eleanor kept a close eye on his progress, occasionally calling him into her office to check in. She guided him with advice, not just about work, but about life. She spoke of resilience, of how storms often prepared people for brighter days. One afternoon, after a successful presentation Marcus had led, Eleanor invited him to join her for tea in her office. As they sat together, she looked at him thoughtfully. "Do you see now, Marcus," she asked, "how one small act can change the course of a life?" Marcus nodded slowly. "I do. I never thought that helping someone at a bus stop would lead me here. But now I realize that kindness is never wasted. It comes back in ways you can't expect." Eleanor smiled, her eyes shining with wisdom. "Exactly. Life has a way of rewarding those who give without asking in return. You didn't know it that night, but you were planting a seed for your own future." Her words stayed with Marcus long after that day. He began to live by them, not only at work but in every part of his life. He carried with him the belief that kindness was a force stronger than any storm, and he made it a point to pass that belief on to others. Years later, Marcus would look back on that rainy evening as the turning point of his life. He would remember the shivering woman with the broken umbrella, and how one simple choice to stop and help had led him to a future he could never have imagined. But in the present moment, as he left Eleanor's office and returned to his desk, he felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time: peace. He was no longer just surviving day to day. He was building a life, one shaped by kindness, resilience, and faith. And though he hadn't known it that night in the storm, he now understood that sometimes, the smallest gestures carry the power to decide futures. His own story was proof of that truth.